morning, everybody. Welcome to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. Isaiah chapter 1 in the New Revised Standard Version. When you come before me, who asked you to take this from your hand? Trample my courts no more. Bringing offerings is futile. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocation, I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. Your new moons and your appointed festivals, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your doings before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice. Rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. Come now, let us argue it out, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be like snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Then over to Isaiah 58. Is not this the fast that I chose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your home? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall call for help, and you will say, Here I am. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight, and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Sometimes we read that we should not do that which is enjoyable on the Sabbath. Understand it to be that, but the business that Isaiah is condemning is not the business of having a swim or playing soccer or anything like that. It's the business of making money. And the people are anxious for the Sabbath to get over so they can get back to buying and selling and trading and cheating and making money. That's the pursuing your own interests is that's all about. So we need to be careful. People sometimes ask, doesn't Isaiah forbid marital intimacy during the Sabbath hours? No, that's not what the test point of the verse is. The verse is, put away all of this money-making intensity just for 24 hours and try to think about other things for that period of time. So we're glad to talk about the Sabbath again with Barry. I think, Barry, yours is the third PhD dissertation I know of at Claremont. Jerry De Jesus one taking a Jungian view of the Sabbath, and then Eric Carter interviewed some rabbis regarding the Sabbath. Now, there may be others as well, but I know of those three, and they're quite different. And I'm wondering if they could have been written at Andrews University, and I'm inclined to say no, because their work is so much more historical and exegetical, and you folk have launched out into Christian existentialism in your case and liberation theology in your case, and then Jerry moved into Jungian psychology as he studied the Sabbath. I'm not quite sure what Eric did with his, but in any case, it's a broader approach to things than I think might be possible there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's begin with prayer. Dear God, we're thankful for the Sabbath and all that it does mean, all that it can mean for us and for others. We're thankful for Barry Casey, who has been willing to share with us this dissertation that he wrote so long ago, but is still so lively now. Help us to learn from him today, I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's see. I have a note from Bronwyn, and it says, make Monty and make Monty and Bronwyn co-hosts. Whoop, I did the wrong thing there. 1 second. As you can see, Forrest is away today, so the team amounts to me and Monty Butler and Bronwyn Larson. Okay, Monty, are you a co-host? You should be. I think Bronwyn is.
Yes, he is. We both
Okay.
are.
Okay, very good. We got ourselves going. Thank you, everybody. Over to Barry Casey. Do you have something you would like us to begin with, or should we begin with some questions from me?
Just one thing, I put in the chat my email address so that if anyone wants to get to me directly and ask for a copy of the dissertation in PDF, you can do so.
Good. We've been making that available in our emails and on the website. And this morning I put it on Facebook as well. So I'm hoping many people will download it. It's free of charge. One can get the whole dissertation for no cost. So that's a bargain, I think. And it's fun to read. As you know, I've been struck by how aesthetically attractive Barry's dissertation is. So it's well worth reading for that reason alone. Okay, Barry, is that all you want to say at the beginning?
Yes, you can go ahead with some questions.
Okay,
like.
now let's go ahead and back and review. First of all, you pose the problem of theodicy. This is the first time we were together, as the problem of reconciling the goodness and power of God with all the evil there is in the world. And then you distinguish the two primary ways in which this has been dealt with over the centuries, one associated with the name of Augustine or Augustine, however you say that. And it emphasizes that it has an aesthetic point of view on this, and that is, if we could see the whole picture, we would recognize that even the dark portions of our lives contribute to the beauty of the whole. Now, one thing you mentioned, Barry, on that was something a little bit new to me, and that is Augustine also has this deprivation notion of good, of evil, that is, evil is the absence of good. And we talked about that, and we agreed that maybe that wasn't a potent or powerful enough way of thinking about evil. Evil is not nothing. Now, I'm just pausing here to work on this a little bit. For Augustine, he was trying to get against the Manichaeans, who believe that evil and good are, as far as we can tell, they believe they were co-eternal. Yes. One would never triumph over the other. He had been a Manichaean for a dozen years or so, and he wanted to get away from that. And so he would say evil is, but I don't think he said evil is nothing. I think he said evil is no thing. Such that evil has no substantial entity of its own. And evil is not to be equated with the material side of things as did the Manichaeans. So I can see how it goes from evil is no thing to evil is nothing pretty swiftly. That is a smooth slide. But I wonder if that's an accurate way. I think maybe we should say it's evil is no thing rather than to say evil is nothing. And when he says no thing, he means no thing that has existence apart from God. I think that's right. You want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, he doesn't want to give substantiality to evil for the reasons that you mentioned. Another way that he says it is that evil is the absence of good.
Mm-hmm.
Absence of good. So I think what he means by that is that the good is what is substantial, is what has being, and evil does not have being, and it is kind of a subtraction from the good. It's a parasite in a way. And you know, I certainly see his point, and I think it's got some good aspects to it in that he was combating Manichaeism. And yet, as you say, no thing gets transferred pretty quickly into nothing. And to say that it's the absence of the good can come across, if you're unreflective, as being quite deficient in my view. Because we experience evil as real, as something terrible and hard in our lives. So that sort of configuration, as Augustine put it, I don't think it rings very well with modern ears.
Now, there was one aspect of that. There was a nuance that I hadn't realized before, and I want to make sure that I understood you correctly. It seemed to me that you said that the deprivation theory of good, that is the idea that evil is the absence of good, is what he used when describing natural evils, and not what he used when discussing moral evils. And that, I wondered why he has in his thinking a free will defense and then this deprivation of good defense. But then I got the impression from you that, well, maybe he used the free will defense with respect to the moral evils that people do, and then the deprivation of good defense for the horrible things that happen in nature that are not any human beings doing. Do I have that correct, that he kind of separated the emptiness theory of good and the free will theory of good along natural and moral evils?
Yes, I think so. And, you know, that's kind of become the Christian default position, to make a distinction between the natural evil and the moral evil. And he wanted to be very clear that moral evil is a result of us using our free will against God's purposes and intentions. And that distinction between moral and natural evil carried on through the centuries. And, you know, with the Lisbon earthquake, that becomes a divide that is set in place. And in terms of kind of modern thinking about it, really the evil that we do, that is the primary evil. And what he might have called the aesthetic evil, natural disasters, we don't think of that as evil anymore. We think of that as a disaster. So I think he kind of set those two main reflections on evil. He set them, you know, for the church for centuries to come.
Yeah, I find that very helpful because, as I previously said, I knew he had these two different theories, but I didn't realize they were distinguishable according to moral evil or natural evil. So that really helps me a great deal. Now, Irenaeus is one who wants to talk about life as a school, a pedagogical way of thinking about our existence, and that in the end, we will see that the hardships through which we passed made some contribution on our journey toward maturity. So he distinguishes between the image of God and the likeness of God. And so we are born in the image of God and become over time in the likeness of God, or is it the other way around? I have forgotten.
I think it's the other way around.
Yeah, okay. So we're
But
born
I'm
in
not
the
absolutely sure.
in the case, we're born one way. Let's say we're born in the likeness of God.
Yes.
And then over time, through the school of life, we become more and more into the image of God. And then Jesus Christ, as the fulfillment of the image of God, becomes a sort of normative. Now, that sort of thinking is more characteristic of Greek Christianity, don't you think?
Yes. Yeah. The idea that we can strive for some kind of wholeness or completeness, or perhaps even perfection. And that comes through suffering. And I suppose if we added that a little Greek flourish to it, it might be a kind of tragic view.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I see that Sister Resurrection is not with us this morning. She's our Greek specialist, and her name, Anastasia, I say, but it's Anna. How do you say it, Brunman?
Anastasia, and she is with us.
Is she?
Yes.
I didn't see
Hello.
her.
I'm not in the picture. Good morning.
Oh, yeah.
Good
Okay.
morning.
Good
Sister
morning.
Resurrection.
Good to see you. I appreciate it. I appreciate my name, Sister Resurrection, very much. Thank you so much. I was going to say, and I'll try to be very short, the Greeks tend to, that evil, well, we know in mythology they have the forces and all that, but when we come down to the Socrates dialogues, and especially the writers of tragedies about the suffering, is that they say to the old and to those that have suffered comes wisdom. And it just comes understanding, and under understanding, wisdom is one of it. As to the evil itself, not as a power, Socrates and the pre-Socratic philosophers were very much against and disbelieved, did not believe that natural phenomena and disasters and all these were from the gods. And also Socrates, actually, that's why he was put to death, because he taught the youth that Sophocles also, that man is more like God and God's like man, that they were very flawed. And so when it came to the, I'll try to be short now, to the evil, and Aristotle on that also agreed that the absence of good, and maybe that's where Augustine got it from, the absence of good, the absence of action, in Socrates especially, the Efzin, the best and the happiest for man. And unfortunately, man doesn't know it. So he has, through reason and experience and suffering, not that it's necessary to discover, but when we don't do justice, when we don't care about our polis, therefore we don't care about ourselves, that's destructive and evil in that sense, which could be interpreted as the absence of not only knowing about it, but acting on those goods is evil.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's wonderful to
Thank
have
you.
somebody who knows the classical literature to enrich what we have. There's a woman named what is her name? Ruden, who's written a book about Paul, because she's a classicist.
Yes,
And
I read it. Yes.
Sarah Rudin.
Yes.
what's her name?
Sarah Rudin.
Sarah Ruden. And so she looks at the New Testament not through the eyes of a New Testament scholar, but through the eyes of a classicist. And I think it was really rewarding. And I had a chance to give one to Siva Tonstad, and he thought it was well worth reading too. So another angle at all of this. So, okay, here we move along, but now we come to, by way of review, we come to the big big shift, because theodicy for Barry turns out to be much more experiential than most theodicies are. Most theodicies are very philosophical, and they aim to become practical at some point, but they never quite get there. And so they remain theoretical all the way through. But Barry, you decided to turn that upside down and begin theodicy on the experiential side, and that has caused some perplexity and maybe some pushback, with some of us saying, not only in our class, but elsewhere, I'm sure, actually, if I had been on your committee, I would have said, now, Mr. Casey, we're so glad you finally got your dissertation done. And I'm going to vote in favor of it. But I want you to know that I don't really think you did a theodicy. I think you did something else. How would you respond?
I would say, well, I think you're right. What I've done is to give an alternative to theodicy, because I'm talking for the most part about suffering and its relation to evil, but I'm not trying to delve all that much into the usual theodicy arguments. Now, one cue I can take here is the book of Job, where Job wants to bring his case to God and is frustrated because God will not answer him. Job sticks to his argument. His friends, however, are doing theodicy. They're saying, it must have been something you did. Search your conscience. You know, it couldn't have been God. It must have been something you did to bring all this on yourself. And he pushes back toward them and says, I want my time in court, but he never gets it. And then when God finally answers him, he doesn't even address the questions that Job has. He gives him an exhibition of power over nature, his creative power, and Job pretty much says, I get it. I spoke in haste. I spoke out of turn. I'll just listen and watch and be quiet. So the argument dissolves. It's not there. But the interesting thing is that when that big show is over, God comes back and says, I'm angry with you guys, that is Job's friends, because of your arguments and what you were saying. So basically he says, your theodicy isn't worth the time. And he kind of puts it aside. And in fact, he's sort of upset with him. So, you know, I respect of course, the centuries of thought that have gone into the theodicy question. And it is, in my view, one of the most meaningful questions anyone can face. And in fact, Susan Neiman has written a book in which she says that is the primary philosophical question. And she looks at the history of philosophy from that lens and shows the distinction between the modern view and the classical view. So I don't dismiss the theodicy question lightly. I merely say, in order for most people to understand and to deal with it, they must find an experiential approach. And in fact, what occurred to me after you, Dave, put up those two sort of parallel things there, the theoretical and the experiential, that I think kind of by default and by the way that we've been structured, we can't help but start with those theoretical questions. But we will inevitably, I hope, get to the experiential. That would be the next step. I don't think, and on reflection, I don't think it's even possible for me to start with the experiential and eventually get to the theoretical, simply because of the way I've been brought up and taught and so forth. But now I'm at the experiential, and that's where I want to put my emphasis.
Right, and you talked a little bit about how this works as your endeavors in the Washington D.C. area, with people who are in very difficult circumstances. I told Barry after I put this up on Facebook. Those of you who don't look at Facebook too often, I'll just say that I put up a list of questions that one might ask in the course of addressing suffering as a practical problem. And you can imagine what they were all the way through. They sort of like a medical diagnosis, really, just kind of work your way through it. But I tried to emphasize that at each time, at each step, renewing one's personal and communal resources to have strength to deal with these issues was very, very important. But I also had the traditional, in another post, the traditional theory of theodicy with, I think, 7 formal possibilities about how they could be resolved. But here's the interesting thing. I found it most difficult to put the experiential first and then the theoretical second. It was just psychologically almost impossible for me to do it. In fact, when I first posted it on Facebook, I put the theoretical first. I breathed a sigh of relief. Well, I said, well, okay, at least I've been true to myself. Then I said to myself, I've been true to myself, but I betrayed Barry. Barry would put the experiential first and the theoretical second. So that's what I did. And so it's there, both are there, but I think it's the case that you want us to begin with the very grim and difficult circumstances people work with. Now, why? Why did you make that shift?
Just a little autobiographical note here, and I hope it has relevance. When I was a kid growing up on the campus at PUC, I used to skateboard a lot. There's a lot of hills at PUC, and so we'd be up there on Sunday afternoons skateboarding up and down those hills. Now, this was the first time that skateboards had come out, and we couldn't afford them. So we made them out of metal roller skates and nailed those to boards. So they didn't have any maneuvering power. There was no cushioning, nothing whatsoever. I remember coming down a hill from Irwin Hall to Clark Hall, and I hit an inch-wide crack near the bottom of the hill. I did a complete somersault in the air and landed on one elbow. And I just got up and, brushed myself off and went back to skateboarding. Well, that elbow swelled up in a matter of minutes, and it was full of blood. And I had no idea. So this is Sunday afternoon. There isn't anyone around. So I ran down to, there was a phone booth. That was back when we had phone booths on campus. And there was a little picture in the phone booth of this sort of mascot of Pacific Bell. And it said, "Find help fast," in the yellow pages. Find help fast in the yellow pages. So I was calling my grandfather to come and help me because I couldn't lower my arm because the blood was messing up the joint. But for some reason, maybe it was the circumstances, that little image and that slogan really stuck in my mind. Find help fast. And that's kind of been a token for me all through life, is when you get in that kind of trouble, when you're suffering, you find help fast. You turn to somebody, something, God, friends, family, to find help. So that might be just kind of a trivial way of saying, I wanted to get as quickly as possible to experience the two ways that we learn are through reason and experience. And I wanted to get quickly to experience and see where that led me. And where it led me was to eventually to the Sabbath.
Did you get any pushback from your committee on wanting to do it from an experiential base?
No, I didn't. In fact, I kind of got the feeling that they were rather removed from the whole process. So I don't know if I got away with something, but they didn't have a whole lot of pushback on it or exploration of it. I mean, they did their duty, that's for sure, but I think they were a bit intrigued at the direction I went and seemed to think that I'd covered it adequately. So I guess I fulfilled the requirements.
Okay, now just this is a little aside, along with the others we've had, but one of your dissertation committee members was John Hutchison, if I remember correctly, and he wrote a big book on world religions and very well known for that. Also an expert on mysticism, and so forth. So he was a very powerful presence in the world of religious studies, but somewhere along the line, I read him comment on the process of secularization in the United States. And he said, one can trace the secularization of this nation according to how the people deal with the Sabbath.
Oh.
Yeah. And now he was talking about Sunday. But his point was that there was a time in this nation when the Sabbath or Sunday or the Lord's Day was treated as somewhat differently from the other days of the week. But as the nation gradually secularized, the number of things that were thought to be appropriate on Sabbath that list was expanded. And I notice now that Wimbledon in England is finally going to allow tennis playing on Sunday after all these years. And that's an indication, I think, of the secularization of the United Kingdom. At least John Hutchison would have thought it that way. So he had some interest in the Sabbath along the way, which might have caught his attention when he was reading your dissertation. So I thought that was fun.
Oh,
Okay.
that is interesting.
Yeah. So now you come down to give us a real quick thumbnail sketch as to why you like Gabriel Marcel and Dorothy Sola.
Yeah, Marcel I found on my own, and he quickly became someone that I studied a lot on my own and continued to be interested in, partly because he looks at some of life's most difficult situations as mystery. He looks at hope as a mystery, and he makes the distinction between mysteries and problems. Problems are exterior to ourselves. We objectify them. They have solutions. We might not be able to find them, but they will have a solution. They can be broken down into component parts and then put back together with the solution. And they don't really affect us that much. Through our technology and through our processes and so forth, we'll deal with them and we go on to something else. But a mystery is very different. For him, a mystery encroaches upon itself and upon us. It becomes part of our experience and our understanding of who we are. So a mystery, in a sense, is a way, it's a kind of doorway into ourselves and our relations to others and eventually to God. And he looks at hope as a mystery and evil as a mystery as well. So that worked well for me. I mean, that's just one reason why I got interested in Marcel. It's the main reason for this dissertation. And then Dorothea Sula, Peter, I was interested in her approach because she comes at it from a feminist and a liberation theology point of view. And she emphasizes action, action as the final result of suffering. And among other things, she breaks down the experience of suffering into 3 phases. The first one, where we are mutely suffering, and that's pretty much being alone with our suffering. The second one is where we lament, we give expression to it, and there we begin to reach out to others. And then the last stage is that of action, where we take action against evil and suffering, and we resist. And that worked well. That dovetailed nicely with some of the things that Marcel says.
Okay, and I'm just adding to what you said last week, and that is he's a Christian existentialist, and that cashes out such that gratitude is more fundamental to understanding human existence than anxiety or dread or fear. And I thought that was powerful. And he points out that from the very beginning of our lives, we're so dependent on others, and our stance should be that of gratitude for all that's going on. It's such a more positive expression of existentialism than one typically finds. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yes, and to me, I had spent a long time in college and into grad school studying Camus, and to a lesser extent Sartre. And I found Camus wonderful, a great writer, and yet I couldn't follow him to the end of the road, which is that of despair and alienation and all of that without God. When I found Marcel, he was so articulate and so lyrical, and as you say, Dave, that aspect of gratitude. Another term that comes up with him is disponibilité, which is translated to be available to other people. And the idea of communication and communion with others is really central to his philosophy. And since I was also a communication major, I picked up on that straight away,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was another aspect of Marcel that I appreciated.
So now moving to the person whose name Peter tells us we should pronounce Sola, something like that. I was struck by something she says, and it is this: the question is not whether we are believing in God, but whether we are living out God.
Right. Yeah.
Believing in God versus living out God. Do you want to say anything about that distinction?
Yeah, it's it's almost a spatial metaphor. You can almost see it happening, in front of you. It's visual. So that we are in God and acting with God. It's a very active and kind of dynamic and passionate sort of response. It's not the idea that we are believing, which is something that's out there that can be objectified. You can have 28 tick marks, and it not touch you at all. So she is one who wants the experience of God to be something that is passionate and inward, with resulting outward action. And Marcel was the same. Soleil was also a kind of Christian mystic, and Marcel had certainly had respect for that. And he is all about intersubjectivity, which is, what's going on inside me and how I communicate that and reach out and touch your soul. And we have communion in that way. So my experience of God should come out and be visible in my relation to you. In fact, we learn about God's love by love for each other.
Okay, and now one of the things we touched on last time we were together was what kind of hope they had for the future. That is, was there anything akin to Christian eschatology in the views of these people, anything akin to the hope that in someday good will triumph over evil? Or are they persuaded that there will be an endless struggle between the two? But there's a third position in between, which would say, well, the future is open. Whether good triumphs over evil is not a question that God's going to settle. It's a question that we're going to settle by how we deal with our lives. And it may well be that evil will triumph over good because of us. For instance, we may destroy this planet. God won't stop us if we choose to do that. So maybe there's a kind of confidence that everything's going to turn out all right. On the other hand, quite the opposite, a pessimistic view that everything's not going to turn out all right. But then there's the one where it's sort of on the knife edge. What happens in the future depends a lot on us. Choose amongst those three or any other you would like to add.
Yes. I would, for myself, I would say the third with some qualifications. A lot does depend on us. And that is because God has given us stewardship over this planet and given us freedom. But neither I nor Marcel believe that we're going to solve all the problems in the world and even save the world. You know, it's so part of the hope that Marcel extends is that someday, I mean, his metaphor for human life is captivity, and he puts up the image of a prisoner of war who knows that he's going to die, and he says to a fellow prisoner, liberation may not happen for me, but it might happen for you. It will happen no matter what. It will happen. So that's what I understand from Marcel about the eschaton, is that I may not live to see it, and you may not, but it will happen someday. And in the meantime, what we do on this earth and to this earth is very important. Now, I would also make a distinction. Growing up as an Adventist, I understood, rightly or wrongly, that we are actually preventing the second coming of Christ because we have not fully reflected God's character in our lives. And I don't believe that. I don't see that God is going to sit around waiting for us to get it right before, God returns. And what I have just mentioned about work in the world can also get perverted into a kind of perfectionistic view that says we have to perfect what we're doing or God will not accept us, and what we do, we don't bring the kingdom in. That's what I'm trying to say. But what we do is important and necessary, and in fact, the work that God has given us. So we need to find our way between thinking that everything relies on us on the one hand, and on the other hand, just sitting back and saying, well, God will take care of everything, and all we have to do is fold our hands and wait. So I want to find something in the middle where it says the kind of work that God has given us to do is significant both for us and for those for whom we work, and yet it is incomplete. God will complete it. And I think that's biblical. So that's how I'd That's the option I would go for.
Okay, and so sometimes the response has been, well, if in the end God is going to bring this all to a satisfactory conclusion, why doesn't God do this now? And you don't have to have an answer to all these questions, but if you do, I'd like to hear them.
I don't have an answer to that one. That's for sure.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
There's another part of Adventist eschatology which I grew up with, and I may have it wrong, but I'll just try it out. It's the idea that the whole universe is watching this earth, and this earth is a kind of object lesson for the universe as to how sin plays out. Now, Ellen White says that all the other beings in the universe are more intelligent than we are, and they're watching us. And God's object lesson is being worked out on this planet. Well, my argument with that is, if they're so smart, why does it take so many thousands of years for them to get the point while we are suffering here? It just didn't make sense. And in fact, I find that attitude rather reprehensible. So I can't accept that one. I don't even know if there's intelligent life out there. I hope so. But if it is, they've learned the lesson a long, long time ago.
Okay.
So, as for why this goes on, I don't know. And I don't think any of us do.
But that gets back to Marcel's mystery, right?
Yes.
This issue is not a problem that we can answer. It's a mystery with which we live.
Yeah.
All right.
And it changes how we live if we regard it as such.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, if it's a problem, we just haven't figured out the solution. And that's my problem with the Odyssey. It's got no solution. But if we think of it as a mystery, then it's constantly calling us into question and our relationship to God and with others. And what can we do about it? That's the question that should occupy us.
Okay, now we turn to the last portion of your dissertation, and I'll go back to the subtitle of it in order to sort of get an umbrella over the last two chapters. And that is, you speak in the subtitle of your dissertation as the power of the Sabbath experience.
Yes.
And I would wish you would begin by saying something about the word experience in this context, the power of the Sabbath experience. What are you talking about?
I am differentiating experience from belief and doctrine, if you like. But I do believe that the Sabbath is something that we are meant to experience. We've got rituals, we have liturgies, we have worship. The text you read in Isaiah addresses some of that. It is something, Sabbath, and I'll talk more about this as we go on, but Sabbath is not simply a day. It's not just a commandment. It is not just a belief. It is an experience that we live in, not just one day a week, but all of the days of the week. And it guides and motivates us through our week to that final day. So I see it as a way of life, a philosophy of life, if you like, for the reasons that I'll mention as we go on here.
Okay, maybe we should go right to your reasons. Well, maybe let's pause just a minute. Let's suppose we see two people. One is living the Sabbath way of life, and the other person is not living the Sabbath way of life. What differences would we see between them?
Well, I don't think you have to be an Adventist to have the Sabbath experience. And you may not even be a Christian in this way. I think you can have a Sabbath experience if you understand some of the ideas about rest, about creation, about grace, about liberation, things like that. Those are things that can be accessible to people who are not Christians, or I should say people of faith. They can be picked up, through literature, through poetry, through history, and so forth. Psychology, all of those kinds of things. So there's a kind of baseline there that I think can appeal to people about the Sabbath. And there's books out there on that very thing. Where the difference comes in is that people who sort of wander into that Sabbath experience, say from a psychological point of view, may really benefit from it, but I don't think they're getting the full picture that includes, the gratitude, the humility, the strengthening that comes from worship with others and worship with God. It's a kind of, you get the baseline benefit, and then there's all this other stuff too. And I would hope that people would get to all the other stuff too.
Okay. I was struck by the use of the word gratitude there. Maybe one difference between a Sabbath way of life and a non-Sabbath way of life is whether one approaches life with gratitude.
Yeah.
I think that's for me an important part of it. Now, you have some things you'd like to share with us about the Sabbath. Let's turn to those right away, right now.
Okay. In this chapter, and it's chapter 4, and I realized that the way the table of contents is laid out, it looks like another chapter. In other words, the fifth chapter.
I wondered about that. I went back to the table of contents and to the chapter, and I said to myself, in the table of contents is 2 chapters. In the text itself, it's 1 chapter.
Right.
I think isn't that so?
Well, it's actually Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And then on the next page, it starts with Roman numeral 5, and it looks like it should be chapter 5, but it doesn't have a heading,
Right.
So it's all under that chapter 4.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a kind of illusion there, visual illusion. So in that final chapter, chapter 4, I begin by talking about the courage to hope and to find faith in God, and to getting to the question behind theodicy. Does Christian faith actually have, as a referent, given the atrocity of Christian complicity with injustice, a God who is both loving and just? That is a quote from Sharon Welch. And so the first task of hope is to find faith in God. The second work of hope is to transform suffering into healing and creative endeavor, to stand in solidarity with the sufferers, and to resist the power of evil. And here's a quote from Marcel. When I say that evil is a mystery, I mean very precisely this. In no sense can the notion of evil be assimilated to that of a defect of function, which could be remedied by suitable methods. I must recognize that evil is not only before me, but within me. In a sense, it is something that rings me round. It lays siege to me. So you can see his difference from Augustine there, and the idea that evil penetrates into us. I begin in the last chapter by talking about life as conflict. The first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is suffering. So this is somewhat akin to that. Life is conflict. And what I mean is that we should go beyond what's rather obvious that life is full of conflict, to say that life seems inevitably, if not necessarily, conflictual. And I say the overriding task of philosophical and theological reflection on life is to help us discover how to deal creatively with the conflict that characterizes life. I define conflict as a protracted struggle, a struggle over time. Conflict can be destructive or creative. To live a life free of conflict is to increase the level of necessity and reduce one's freedom. So it's kind of a, what are you willing to give up? If you've got freedom, you have conflict. If you have free will, you've got conflict. If you want to reduce that conflict or wipe it out, becoming an automaton would be a good way to do that. What's the relation between conflict and suffering? Well, they're related, but they are distinct. I'll give an example. When I'm standing up, and I used to use this in class, when I'm standing up in front of the class, upright in vertical position, there are muscles in my body that are working against each other to keep me upright, in my legs and my back and so forth. I'm not a physiologist, but I know that much, that they work against each other to keep me vertical. And that's a type of creative conflict. But I think there's an even better illustration. When I was writing this dissertation, I used to run 10K races in the Washington area. And I'd run 5 or 6 over the course of the season. And then when I wasn't racing, I was running, jogging. And I'd come back from those runs sometimes in pain, but it was good pain, in that this is something I wanted to do and I was willing to suffer, and it was fine. But then think of someone who has crossed the border and they're running through the desert. They're panicking. It's hot. Maybe their shoes are giving out. And they run exactly 6.2 miles. They do a 10K with the Border Patrol in hot pursuit. They are suffering. And what's the difference between us? Well, I've accepted the suffering. I understand that it's part of what I'm trying to achieve and what I am enjoying in the race and in the run. But they have not accepted it. It has been imposed upon them. And because of that, they are suffering. So looking then at creative conflict, it's a way to transform suffering, which comes to all of us, into something that can be creative and even more can accomplish what I call transformational solidarity. That is, transforming destructive conflict into creative conflict, and in order to resist evil and to stand in solidarity with those who are suffering. I go back to Soleil here and her 3 phases of suffering. The first one of mute pain, in which we accept the suffering, but we feel almost overwhelmed. The second of the articulation of suffering. And the third, which is action to resist. And here's where it's parallel to Marcel. A phrase that runs through all of Marcel's philosophy is very simple. I hope in thee for us. I hope in thee for us. And that's parallel, I think, to Soleil's idea that we join together in that action against evil and suffering. I join with you for us to stand against the suffering. I hope in thee for us. So this transformational solidarity then brings about, a question of hope or despair. We can capitulate to suffering and to evil. And Marcel talks about that as a kind of disintegration of the self, a giving up of who we are and a capitulation over to evil, but it doesn't have to be that way. The contrast here between hope and despair, action or passivity, capitulation or acceptance, solidarity or divisiveness. So then I look at the Sabbath as a symbol of shared hope. And I say that the Sabbath combines the concept of hope with the memory of suffering. And it provides the means through which the individual and the community can find solidarity in ethical action. Now, there are 4 ways that the Sabbath relates to hope here. And I'll go through them quickly, and then we can talk about, have questions. Or do you want to take a break now, Dave?
No, let's go for it.
Okay.
Well, maybe I spoke too swiftly. Should we take a break? And then how would you
Yeah.
feel?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then when we come back, we'll deal with these 4. Now, what strikes me as significant here is that really this is a dissertation about hope.
yes.
It's a dissertation about hope. And the Sabbath is a symbol in Paul Tillich's sense of the word, something in which we participate. The Sabbath is a symbol of memory and anticipation that nurtures hope. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Yeah. In the service of resisting evil.
Right. Now, that's really important because in the process of resisting evil, it is possible to become hopeless.
Yeah.
Very easy to become hopeless. That these situations will never improve. And so kind of despair sets in. Okay, let's take a break and let's pick it up here with your 4 points about how the Sabbath and hope relate, and then we'll go to a discussion, all right? So it's now about 11:33, and so let's reconvene at 11:45. That's 12 minutes.
Yeah.
11:45. Thank you, everybody. I'll turn off the recording and we will take a break.
Okay.